Story 1. Irion and the Eternal Flame. Tonight we drift into a forgotten corner of Greek myth, into a tale that was never carved deeply enough into marble, never sung loudly enough in temples, and yet may have once lived in the quiet crackle of every ancient hearth. It is the story of Irion, the son of fire and sorrow. He was not born beneath the golden roofs of Olympus. No thunder announced his arrival. No god placed a crown above his cradle. No oracle stood beside his mother and declared that the child would one day change the fate of mankind. Irion was born far below the heavens, in the smoke-dark heart of a mortal forge, where iron glowed red in the coals and bronze softened beneath the hammer. He came into the world among sparks, ash, sweat, and the steady rhythm of metal being shaped by human hands. His mother was Callista, a blacksmith of Mycenae, a woman whose name was spoken with both admiration and unease. She was not beautiful in the way poets usually praised women. She did not move through palace halls in pale robes. She did not wear perfume, gold, or flowers in her hair. Callista wore soot on her skin like war paint, and her hands were scarred from years of labor before the fire. But when she worked, even proud men grew silent. Her hammer fell with purpose. Her blades came from the forge balanced and alive, as though the metal had not been forced into shape, but persuaded. Warriors said her swords could split spears in midair. Kings sent messengers across dangerous roads to beg for her armor. Some even whispered that Ares himself had once worn a breastplate made by her hands. Whether that was truth or tavern exaggeration, no one knew. But the gods noticed, and among them, one god watched more closely than the others. Hephaestus, the lame god of the forge, the divine craftsman of Olympus, saw in Callista something that reminded him of himself. Not beauty, not obedience, not worship. He saw endurance. He saw a soul that belonged to heat, pressure, and creation. He saw someone who understood that all strong things must first be placed inside fire. One night, when the moon hung low and red above the Aegean, Callista remained alone in her workshop long after the city had fallen asleep. The streets outside were quiet. The cold wind moved between stone houses, but inside the forge the air was warm, heavy, and glowing. Then the flames rose, not violently, almost respectfully. Smoke gathered near the doorway, twisting upon itself as if shaped by invisible hands. From that smoke stepped Hephaestus. He came without ceremony. No trumpets, no divine procession, no thunder rolling across the sky. He looked not like the proud gods painted on temple walls, but like something older and more tired. A figure of smoke, bronze, heat, and shadow. Callista did not fall to her knees. Perhaps that was why he stayed. She looked at him as one craft person might look at another who had entered the workshop after dark. Not with fear, not with worship, with recognition. For a long moment they said nothing. The forge burned brighter around them. By morning, the god was gone, but the fire had changed. 9 months later, during a night when winter pressed against the doors of Mycenae, Callista gave birth to a son. The child did not cry. The midwives froze, fearing the worst. But then his eyes opened, and in their darkness something began to glow. Not like a torch, not like lightning, but like coals buried deep beneath ash. At that exact moment, the forge fire leapt high, though no one had touched it. One midwife stumbled backward and whispered that the baby had been touched by the divine. Another made a sign against evil. The oldest woman in the room, whose face was lined like dry bark, stared at the child for a long time before murmuring that he would not remain in the world the way other men did.
Callista took the child into her arms.
She did not fear the warmth of his skin. She named him Irion. From the beginning, he was a quiet child. Too quiet, some said. He watched the flames before he watched people. He listened to the forge as if it spoke in a language only he could understand. At 5, he could sit for hours beside the coals without growing restless. At 7, he shaped his first blade. It was small, simple, and flawless, warm to the touch even after cooling. The village never knew what to make of him. Children avoided him because he did not play as they played. Priests avoided him because they sensed something in him that did not fit neatly into prayer. Adults lowered their voices when he passed. Some called him blessed. Others called him cursed. The son of a god with no throne. The child of a mortal woman who had drawn the attention of Olympus. The boy who did not command fire, but seemed to be remembered by it. Only Callista loved him without hesitation.
She taught him not merely how to strike metal, but how to understand the flame that softened it. Fire obeys those who listen, she would tell him, guiding his young hands near the warmth. Not those who command. Irion never forgot that. Years passed. His body grew strong, but his silence remained. By the time he was 16, his name had already traveled farther than his feet. Traders came to Mycenae for tools shaped by his hand. Soldiers asked for blades that held warmth even in the cold. Farmers swore that plows from his forge cut through stubborn earth more cleanly than any others. Yet Irion did not seem proud. He worked because the fire was there, because the metal waited, because something inside him felt unfinished. Then the world began to grow cold. At first, people explained it away. A hearth failed in one house, then in another. A cooking fire that should have burned through the night died before dawn. A temple lamp went out and would not relight. A baker's oven cooled in the middle of the day, leaving bread half-formed and pale. In distant villages, blacksmiths struck flint again and again, but produced only weak sparks and smoke. People blamed damp wood, then bad omens, then the stars. But the cold spread. Spring arrived late and thin. Crops wilted beneath sunlight that seemed to carry less warmth than before. Storms lasted longer. Forests grew still. Children slept wrapped in every blanket their families owned. Old women whispered prayers into ashes that gave no heat. The fear that settled over mankind was not only fear of winter. It was something deeper. A feeling that the gods had turned away. And they had. High atop Mount Olympus, the last true flame still burned in a divine brazier. It was the ancient fire once brought to mankind through defiance, the same sacred force that had given mortals more than warmth. It had given them craft, thought, memory, art, and rebellion. It had turned caves into homes, ore into tools, grain into bread, and darkness into something that could be survived. But the gods had never forgiven that gift. They remembered Prometheus. They remembered the theft. They remembered how quickly humans had learned to look upward, to question, to build, to dream beyond the place assigned to them. So the Olympians sealed the last eternal flame away. No mortal hand could touch it. No god was allowed to share it. And as the divine fire withdrew from the world, mankind began to shiver. Yet not every whisper in creation obeyed Olympus. Dryads in hidden woods spoke of a boy born of flame. Nymphs saw sparks in the eyes of a young blacksmith from Mycenae. The winds carried his name from valley to valley. Irion. At first, he knew nothing of it. He only knew that his forge had become harder to keep alive. He had to feed the fire more often. He had to breathe over the coals longer. Even the iron seemed reluctant to soften, as though the world itself had forgotten how to yield. Then one night, as he worked alone, the flame in his forge bent toward the north. Not because of wind. There was no wind. It simply leaned, long and thin, as if pointing. Irion stared into it and saw, for the briefest moment, a mountain rising above clouds. At its summit burned a white fire, silent and watching. The vision vanished, but the feeling remained. A pull, a summons. Callista saw the change in him before he spoke of it. Mothers often recognize the moment their children begin to belong to something beyond them. She did not ask him to stay. She did not tell him he was too young, or that gods were cruel, or that prophecy rarely spared the brave. She only placed one hand against his cheek, rough from labor, warm from the forge. "You were born from fire," she said softly. "But that does not mean fire owns you." Irion wanted to believe her. But deep inside his chest, something had already begun to glow. So he left Mycenae before dawn, carrying no army, no shield, no royal blessing, only a cloak, a hammer, a small knife, and one ember from his mother's forge sealed inside a bronze lantern. His road led first to Delphi. Once Delphi had been the breathing heart of prophecy. Kings had climbed its sacred paths to beg for Apollo's voice. Warriors had offered gold before marching to war. Pilgrims had slept beneath its columns, hoping for dreams that might explain their suffering. But when Irion arrived, the sanctuary was dying. The stones were cracked. Ivy clung to broken altars. The sacred springs had thinned to mist. The torches that lined the temple had long since gone dark. The place felt less like the home of a god and more like a memory the world had almost finished forgetting. No priest greeted him. No worshippers stood in line. Only thunder moved slowly in the clouds above, low and watchful. Irion descended into the hollow chamber beneath the temple, where the air smelled of old smoke and wet stone. There, seated on a crumbling throne, waited the oracle. She was wrapped in violet robes faded by years. Her skin was pale as ash. Her eyes were blind, yet they seemed filled with storms. Before Irion could speak, she inhaled sharply. "Irion," she whispered. He had not given his name. The chamber seemed to tighten around him. "You will climb the mountain," the oracle said. "You will take the flame." Her voice trembled, but not from weakness. "And you will die."
Irion did not step back. He had expected riddles. He had expected the usual language of prophecy. Symbols, warnings, half-truths hidden inside poetry. But this was not a riddle. It was a sentence. The oracle slowly lifted her face toward him, though her blind eyes could not see him. The gods will oppose you. Death will test you. The messenger will wound you without drawing blood.
The fire you seek does not belong to mortals. It was stolen once, and the price was eternal torment. Irion's hands curled into fists. Then let me pay the price. For a moment there was silence. Then the oracle laughed, not cruelly, sadly. The sound of someone who had watched too many brave souls walk willingly toward endings they could not understand. "You already are," she whispered. The thunder above the temple stopped. The air went still. Then smoke slipped from the oracle's lips, and her body sank back against the stone. The prophecy was finished. Irion left Delphi without another word. But after that, every flame he passed seemed to lean toward him. Every candle, every torch, every dying coal turned slightly in his direction, as if recognizing the shape of what he might become. The road to Olympus was long and bitter. Villages along the way had grown quiet. People no longer gathered joyfully around hearths. They guarded sparks like treasure. Families slept close together for warmth. In some places, the old had given their blankets to children and sat awake through the night, staring at cold fireplaces with hollow eyes. Irion did not tell them why he traveled, but each time he saw a dead hearth, the ember inside his lantern burned brighter. At last, he reached the foot of Olympus. The mountain did not look like a place. It looked like a judgment. Its peak disappeared into clouds. Its slopes were dark with pine forests and broken stone. No path clearly led upward. No friendly shrine stood at its base. The air around it felt older than weather, older than empire, older even than prayer. Irion understood then why the old myths said that no one truly climbed Olympus without first being accepted by it. And Olympus did not accept the untested. Beneath the mountain, hidden among roots and shadow, there was said to be an ancient passage leading near the borders of the underworld. Not fully in the land of the dead, not fully in the land of the living, but somewhere between. A threshold guarded by the oldest fear known to mankind. Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades. Irion had known this part of the legend since childhood. He had studied myths the way other smiths studied heat, patiently and with suspicion. He knew that before he could rise, he would first have to descend. So he did not prepare by forging a sword. Instead, he prepared something stranger. For 3 days and 3 nights, beneath the dark trees at the mountain's base, Irion worked over a small traveling fire. He shaped a collar from black iron, obsidian, and the last ember taken from Callista's forge. He did not make it as a chain. He made it as an offering. Into the metal, he carved 3 words: memory, loyalty, grief. On the 4th morning, he entered the cave beneath Olympus. The darkness there did not feel empty. It felt crowded with things that had been forgotten. The air was cold, but not like winter. It did not bite the skin.
It pressed inward, touching old fears buried deep in the soul. Irion walked past stones slick with underground mist, past bones that glowed faintly beneath the earth, past torches that burned with no visible flame. Then he heard breathing. Slow, massive, layered, like 3 storms sleeping in the same body. Cerberus lay in a hollow of ash and ancient bone. His fur was blacker than moonless night. Each of his heads stirred in a different rhythm. One dreamed, one listened, one watched with a half-open amber eye. Irion did not reach for his knife. He knelt, and very softly, he began to hum. It was the song Callista had sung to him when he was small, on nights when the world outside the forge felt too large and too cruel. A low, steady melody, simple enough for a child, old enough to soothe something older than mankind. The middle head stirred. The left opened both eyes. The right snarled, then slowly fell silent.
The beast listened.
Irion held out the collar. For one long moment, nothing moved. Then Cerberus lowered his heads. Irion placed the collar around the hound's neck. The cave exhaled. Behind the beast, a stone door opened without sound. Not because Irion had conquered death, but because death had recognized him. He passed through and eventually emerged again beneath the cold sky at the foot of Olympus. He was paler than before. His hands shook slightly, but his eyes burned with a steadier light. The mountain now allowed him to climb. There was no road upward, only rock, ice, wind, and silence. Irion climbed with bleeding hands and tired limbs, moving higher through mist and storm. The air thinned. The world below disappeared. More than once, loose stone gave way beneath his feet. More than once, he nearly fell. But each time he thought of turning back, he remembered the villages without fire. He remembered children beside dead hearths. He remembered his mother's voice. And he climbed.
It was high above the clouds that Hermes came to him. At first, the god looked like a traveler resting on a ledge, his cloak loose around his shoulders, a coin flashing between his fingers. His sandals were laced with small white wings, and his smile was sharp enough to cut. "Well," Hermes said, looking Irion up and down, "I thought you would be taller." Irion kept climbing. Hermes walked beside him without touching the stone. "You know why I'm here, don't you?" the god asked. "To stop me." Hermes laughed. "No. If Olympus wanted you stopped, lightning would have found you already. I am here to make sure you understand what you are trying to steal." "The flame belongs to the world," Irion said. "The flame belongs to power," Hermes replied. "That is why everyone wants it." Irion stopped and looked at him. Hermes' smile faded a little. "You think this is mercy," the god continued. "You think you are saving mankind, but fire is never only warmth. It is hunger, ambition, war, pride. Give mortals fire, and they do not merely cook bread. They forge blades. They build towers. They look toward heaven and ask why gods should rule at all. Maybe the gods fear the question because they have no answer." The coin vanished from Hermes' hand. The air around them changed. "You sound like Prometheus," Hermes said coldly. "I am not trying to be Prometheus,"
No, Hermes whispered. You are trying to finish what he started. Before Irion could move, Hermes stepped forward and pressed 2 fingers against his chest. Pain opened inside him, not in the flesh, deeper, as if a thread at the center of his being had been seized and twisted. Irion fell to one knee, gasping. Heat flashed beneath his ribs, sharp and white, no longer comforting, no longer familiar. It felt like a star trapped inside his body. Hermes leaned close. Here is my gift, son of the forge. The fire you seek will not sit in your hand like a torch. It will enter you.
It will burn away everything human until only the flame remains. Then the god was gone. The pain stayed. It settled into Irion's chest like a second heart. Above him, thunder rolled. A storm began around the mountain, but Irion kept climbing. The higher he rose, the more Olympus seemed alive. The cliffs shifted beneath him. Winds screamed through ravines like angry voices. Snow fell sideways. The stars withdrew behind clouds, as if even the heavens did not want to witness what was coming. The curse inside him grew stronger with every step. Sometimes it warmed him enough to survive. Sometimes it burned so fiercely that he could barely breathe. His blood felt too bright for his veins. His shadow flickered strangely against the stone, no longer shaped entirely like a man. Yet he climbed. Near the upper reaches, he passed ruins carved into the mountain itself, broken altars, cracked columns, statues of gods half buried in snow. Athena with her eyes chipped away, Apollo missing one hand.
Hera's face split by time. Even Zeus sat in stone upon a shattered throne, his carved lightning still clenched in one fist, though his head had fallen beside the path. Irion stopped before the ruined king of gods, and suddenly he understood. The gods were afraid. Not because they were weak in the way mortals were weak, but because they could fade. They could be forgotten. They could become statues in the snow, names spoken less often with each passing generation. They had not hidden the flame because mankind was unworthy. They had hidden it because mankind was becoming too capable of living without them. Irion looked at the fallen face of Zeus, then he continued upward. At last, he rose above the storm. The world became silent. Clouds stretched beneath him like a pale sea. The stars burned cold and clear overhead. There were no golden gates at the summit, no marble palace, no court of gods waiting in judgment, no music, no thunder, no divine welcome. Only a windless clearing. At its center stood a pedestal of blackened stone, and upon it rested the brazier. The eternal flame burned inside. It was not red, not orange, not like any earthly fire. It was white, pure, blinding, and terribly still. It did not flicker. It watched. Irion stepped closer. The heat did not strike him. It entered him gently, like recognition. The cursed ember in his chest began to pulse. His breath caught. In the flame, he saw the first campfire in the darkness of a prehistoric cave. He saw bread rising in clay ovens. He saw bronze pouring like sunlight. He saw cities built around hearths, temples lit by oil lamps, torches raised in rebellion.
candles held beside the dying. He saw fire warming hands. He saw fire burning homes. He saw plows. He saw swords. He saw everything mankind had done with the gift. The flame had never been innocent, but neither was the world without it. For a moment, Irion could still turn back. He could leave the fire where it was.
He could descend, if the mountain allowed it. He could return to Mycenae, to his mother's forge, to whatever life remained for him after Hermes' curse. Then the wind moved softly through the silent summit, and in that wind he heard his mother's name, Callista. Irion reached into the brazier and took the flame. The moment his hand closed around it, the world vanished. Pain roared through him, not like burning, but like being remade. His bones felt as though they cracked and formed again around light. His blood became heat. His breath became smoke. The curse in his chest opened like a star, and the eternal flame poured into him. He fell to his knees. The brazier flickered, dimmed, then went cold. For the first time in centuries, the sacred fire of Olympus no longer belonged to the gods. It had chosen a new vessel. Irion lay beside the empty pedestal, barely breathing. Smoke rose from his fingers. His skin glowed faintly, as if dawn had been trapped beneath it. He had taken the flame,
but not as a thief, not as a conqueror, as a sacrifice. And far below, in the frozen world of mortals, the first dead hearth began to glow again. Irion did not descend Olympus as a man who had survived. He descended as something the world had no name for. The mountain that had fought him on the way up no longer resisted him on the way down. The stones beneath his feet seemed to settle before he stepped on them. The wind no longer screamed into his face. The clouds parted in silence, not with worship, but with recognition. He was not welcome. He was not forgiven. But he had been changed, and even Olympus understood that what had happened at its summit could not be undone. The eternal flame no longer burned in the divine brazier. It burned inside him. Every breath Irion took released a thin thread of warmth into the frozen air. Every step left a faint mark of melted frost behind him. His cloak had burned away at the edges.
His hair shimmered with a dull golden light, not bright like Apollo's sun, but deep and molten, like metal pulled fresh from the forge. His skin had begun to crack in fine, dark lines, like cooled obsidian, and beneath those cracks glowed something white and alive. He was still Irion, but less with every step. That was the truth Hermes had given him. The flame had not simply entered his body. It had begun to translate him into itself. His memories flickered strangely now. Sometimes he remembered his mother's voice as clearly as if she walked beside him. Sometimes he could no longer remember the shape of her face. Sometimes he saw not his own childhood, but the childhood of fire itself. The first spark caught in dry grass, the first terrified humans gathered around warmth, the first hand reaching toward flame and learning both fear and wonder. The eternal fire was not only heat, it was memory, and it carried everything.
Irion felt the first campfires of mankind glowing inside him.
He felt clay ovens, bronze furnaces, temple lamps, funeral candles, watchtowers, signal fires, and battlefield torches. He felt the comfort of soup shared among strangers on winter roads. He felt the terror of burning cities. He felt the prayers whispered over candles by grieving mothers. He felt every weapon ever shaped in heat. The gift of fire had always been double-edged, and now all of it lived in him. Still he kept walking, down through cloud, down through broken ruins, down past the fallen statues of gods who had once believed themselves untouchable. When he reached the place where the underworld passage opened beneath the roots of Olympus, Cerberus was gone. The hollow where the beast had slept stood empty, marked only by ash and 3 enormous impressions in the earth. Perhaps death had returned to its own kingdom. Perhaps it had stepped aside because it knew Irion no longer belonged fully to the living. He did not stop to wonder. Below the mountain, the world waited. The first village he reached had nearly surrendered to the cold. Its houses crouched low beneath heavy frost. Smoke no longer rose from the roofs. The well had frozen at the mouth. A few thin goats stood silent in their pen, their breath pale in the air. No children played outside. No hammer ran. No bread baked. People gathered when they saw him approaching. At first they were afraid. Who would not be? A young man walked into their village with glowing eyes, cracked skin, and smoke rising from his hands. His footsteps melted the snow. His breath warmed the wind. He looked like a wound torn open in winter itself. Some reached for knives. Some whispered prayers. One old woman simply began to cry. Irion said nothing. Words had become difficult. His tongue felt heavy, as if language were now too small for what moved inside him. So he walked to the nearest house, where a dead hearth sat full of grey ash, and he knelt before it. The family inside backed away. Irion lifted one hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a small flame slipped from his fingertips. It was tiny at first, barely more than a trembling white spark. It touched the ash, curled into the blackened wood, and suddenly the hearth roared to life. Warmth filled the room. Real warmth, the kind people had nearly forgotten. The mother of the house gasped and covered her mouth. A child stepped forward, eyes wide, hands reaching toward the fire as if greeting a lost friend. The old woman outside sank to her knees. Irion rose and moved to the next house, then the next, and the next. Every hearth he touched awakened. Flames spread through the village, not as destruction, but as return. Chimneys breathed smoke again. Frozen doors loosened. Pots were placed over fires. Children laughed for the first time in weeks. Somewhere, someone began to sing, with a cracked voice that had almost forgotten how. Irion did not stay to be thanked. He walked on. By nightfall, the village behind him glowed like a constellation fallen to earth. And ahead of him, more darkness waited. So he continued, across valleys, through forests, over frozen roads, past shrines whose gods no longer answered, past towns where people had learned to sleep in fear of morning. Wherever he went, he gave fire back. He did not throw it into the world like a conqueror scattering treasure. He placed it carefully, almost tenderly, into hearths, into ovens, into lamps,
into forges, into the hands of those who remembered how to care for flame, and those who had only known its absence. And each time he gave it away, less of him remained. His body thinned, his voice faded, his skin cracked deeper, and light shone through the openings. Sometimes, when people looked at him from the corner of their eyes, he seemed less like a man and more like a walking shape of heat wrapped in smoke. His footprints glowed briefly after he passed, then cooled into ordinary earth.
The people began to whisper his name, Irion. At first they whispered it with fear, then with awe, then with gratitude. But he never asked for worship. He never accepted offerings. When villagers tried to kneel, he turned away. When priests tried to name him a messenger of the gods, the flames around them bent low, as if refusing the lie. Irion had not acted on behalf of Olympus. He had acted because Olympus would not. The gods felt it. High above the clouds, the empty brazier stood cold. The summit of Olympus remained silent. No feast was held. No thunderstorm rose in punishment. No divine army descended to reclaim what had been taken. Perhaps the gods were too stunned. Perhaps they were afraid. Or perhaps, somewhere deep beneath pride and power, even they understood that Irion had not stolen the flame for glory. He had restored its purpose. The world began to change. In distant villages where no traveler had yet arrived, hearths lit by themselves.
Blacksmiths found their forges heating faster than before. Candles that had burned weak and blue now rose steady and gold. Forests locked in unnatural frost began to thaw. Snow slipped from branches. Streams moved again beneath the ice. And always there were stories. A baker in Argos claimed a stranger with glowing hands had stood in her doorway at midnight, touched her oven, and disappeared before dawn. A shepherd in the mountains swore he saw a figure of light walking through snow without leaving cold behind. Children told their parents they had seen a man beside the hearth just before the flames returned, his face kind but impossible to remember. Some said he was a god. Others said he was a ghost. The oldest said no, he was something rarer. A mortal who had given away so much of himself that the world could no longer decide where he ended. Irion's final road led him back toward Mycenae, or perhaps the flame led him. By then, his body was failing. Every movement released smoke. His hands trembled. His sight blurred between the world before him and the countless memories carried by the fire inside. He saw his mother's forge as it had been when he was a child. Bright, loud, alive. He saw it as it was now. Cold, abandoned, waiting. Callista was gone. Whether she had died before his return or simply passed beyond the reach of the story, no one could say. Some claimed she lived long enough to feel warmth return to the city and smiled as though she knew. Others said she had died beside a dying forge, still trusting that her son would find the fire. But one thing was certain. Her workshop was the last place Irion touched. It stood quiet at the edge of Mycenae, its roof sagging, its walls blackened by years of smoke. Tools hung where they had always hung. The anvil sat in the center like a sleeping altar.
Cold ash filled the pit where the forge had once burned day and night. Irion entered near dawn. No crowd followed him. No priest witnessed him. No god descended.
Only the old walls remembered. He stood before the forge and placed one glowing hand against the stone. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the forge ignited. Not violently, not with a roar. It woke. A deep, steady flame rose from the ash, warm and golden, filling the room with the same light that had watched over his birth. The tools on the walls trembled softly. The anvil shone. The air smelled of iron, pine smoke, and home. Irion smiled. It was the first time he had smiled since taking the flame. Then his body began to come apart. Not in horror, not in pain, in release. The cracks in his skin widened and light poured through them. His hands dissolved into sparks. His breath became smoke. His blood became warmth. Bone, voice, memory, and sorrow loosened from the shape of a man and spread outward into the forge, into the city, into the morning air. He did not fall. There was simply less of him with each passing breath, until there was no body left at all, only flame and the sound, faint but steady, of a hammer striking an anvil. No tomb was ever built for Irion. No statue stood in Mycena bearing his face. No temple claimed him. No priests invented rituals in his name. Perhaps that was fitting. He had never wanted to be worshipped. Yet he did not vanish. After the fires returned, people noticed strange things. A hearth that should have died in the night continued to glow until morning. A blacksmith, exhausted and alone, would hear a second hammer strike in rhythm with his own. A traveler lost in winter would find a small flame burning beneath a stone ledge where no human hand had lit it. A grieving family would light one candle, and somehow the room would feel warm enough to endure another night. In every village, every city, every lonely mountain hut, the eternal flame lived differently now. Not locked in a divine brazier, not guarded by jealous gods. It lived in ordinary places, in soup shared with strangers, in bread pulled from ovens,
in torches carried through dark roads, in lamps beside sleeping children, in forges where tools were made for hands that would never be famous, in candles lit for those who were gone. And sometimes, when a fire dimmed for no reason and then rose again on its own, people would whisper that Irion had passed through. Others said that if you listened closely to the crackle of flame, beneath the hiss of burning wood, beneath the pop of sap and ember, you could hear the rhythm of a hammer on an anvil. Steady, patient, eternal. Because Irion did not become a god. He became something older than worship and kinder than power. He became warmth itself. A boy born in a mortal forge, who climbed higher than any mortal should, took what the gods had hidden and gave himself away piece by piece so the world could remember how to glow. In the land of Sparta, where children learned discipline before they learned tenderness, and where honor was carved into the body like a second skeleton,
there lived a woman named Leonthe. She was born into a city that did not forgive softness. Sparta was a place of bronze, dust, shouting, and silence. Boys were trained to endure hunger, pain, and fear before they could fully understand any of them. Men measured themselves by scars. Mothers were expected to raise children who would return from battle with shields in hand, or not return at all. But Spartan women were not fragile shadows behind stone walls. They were fierce in their own right. They managed estates, spoke with sharp tongues, carried themselves with pride, and understood that strength could live in more than one kind of body. Even among them, Leonthe stood apart. She was the daughter of Commander Adrastus, a man whose name was spoken with respect in war councils and with caution in private homes.
He had trained soldiers for most of his life. His voice was hard. His eyes were colder than iron left out at night. He did not raise children so they might be happy. He raised them so they might be useful to Sparta. Leonthe was born during a blood-red eclipse. The moon darkened above the city, and the sky took on the color of old wounds. Dogs howled in the streets. Priests argued over omens. Midwives whispered that no ordinary child came into the world beneath such a sign. Some said she belonged to Ares. Others said the city itself had given birth to her. By the time she was 12, she had already defeated her brothers in the wrestling yard. By 16, she had led a hunting party into the Taygetus Mountains and returned with wild boars tied behind her chariot. By 20, men who had seen battle lowered their voices when she entered a room. Leonthe did not need to shout to be obeyed. She walked through the Spartan agora with a straight spine and quiet steps. Her hair was usually bound simply, her arms marked by training, her gaze steady enough to make liars look away. She spoke rarely, and when she did, her words landed like arrows, clean, direct, and never wasted. People admired her. Some feared her. Few understood her. Because beneath the armor, beneath the discipline, beneath the reputation Sparta had built around her like a wall, there was a part of Leonthe that no one had been allowed to see. At night, when the torches burned low and the city sank into restless sleep, she would remove her armor piece by piece and sit alone beneath the open sky. She would look up at the stars, not with the challenge of a warrior, but with the wonder of someone who suspected the world was larger than she had been taught. There was a longing inside her that battle could not satisfy. Not a longing for marriage, not for wealth, not for praise. Something stranger, something gentler, something Sparta had no language for. Peace, perhaps. Or mystery.
Or the simple ache of wanting to be seen without needing to be strong. She never spoke of it. There would have been no point. Sparta respected endurance, not confession. So Leonthe buried that secret softness deep, as she had been taught to bury pain. But some things buried too long begin to move in the dark. Every full moon, when the city grew quieter and even the watchmen seemed less cruel beneath the silver light, Leonthe felt a pull toward the cliffs above the river Eurotas. At first, she resisted it. Then she began to follow it. She would leave behind her spear, then her shield, then, eventually, even her armor. She would walk alone beyond the city walls, past olive trees and sleeping fields, past the places where Spartan law still felt close enough to breathe down her neck.
And when the hills opened beneath the moon, she allowed herself to become something no one in Sparta had ever asked her to be. Not a weapon, not a daughter, not a symbol of discipline, only a woman walking beneath the stars. The world, she thought during those nights, must be bigger than Sparta, bigger than commands, bigger than battle lines, bigger than the pride of men who believed pain was the only truth. She felt it in her blood like distant music, a song she could not hear, but somehow knew was playing somewhere. And then, one night, she found the grove. It was hidden between two cliffs, so carefully folded into the land that she might have passed it 100 times without noticing. The entrance was veiled by silver leaves and low branches. Beyond them lay a small lake, still as polished glass, holding the moon perfectly on its surface. The air felt different there, older, softer, as if the grove had been waiting in silence for longer than Sparta had existed. Leonthe stepped through the trees and stopped. On the lake was a swan. It glided without disturbing the water. Its feathers were not simply white. They shimmered with a pale glow, like starlight woven into living form. Its long neck curved with impossible grace. Its body moved through the moonlit water as if carried by a song too quiet for human ears. But it was the eyes that held her. No animal fear lived in them, no wild panic, no dull instinct. The swan looked at Leonthe with awareness, with patience, almost with recognition. Her training told her to be cautious. Nothing in nature behaved like this. No creature stood so calmly before a stranger in the dark. Her hand moved toward the small dagger at her thigh, but she did not draw it. The swan drifted closer. The lake did not ripple. Leonthe stood at the water's edge, her heartbeat steady but alert. The swan reached the shallows and bowed its head slightly, not like an animal begging for food, but like one noble soul greeting another. Slowly, Leonthe knelt. She had seen many things in her life. She had seen men bleed into dust. She had seen warriors scream toward the heavens. She had seen newborn animals take their first shaking breaths. She had seen fear, pride, rage, victory. But she had never seen anything so quiet, so still, so impossibly gentle. She reached out. The swan did not move away. Her fingertips brushed its feathers. They were warm, unnaturally warm, as though the creature carried sunlight beneath its skin. Something moved inside Leonthe then. Not fear, not fascination. Something deeper, a feeling she had no training for. Connection. The swan blinked once, then turned and glided back toward the center of the lake. Leonthe remained kneeling long after it moved away, staring at the moonlit water, unable to explain what had happened, and yet certain of one thing. It had not been an accident. The next full moon she returned. So did the swan. And the next month, and the next. No words passed between them. No promises were made. No divine sign appeared in the sky. There was only the grove, the lake, the moon, the woman, and the silent creature that waited for her, as if waiting had become its purpose. By autumn, Leonthe no longer questioned why she went. She only knew that the swan would be there, and that when she sat beside it, the part of her that had been buried beneath Sparta began to breathe. Seasons turned. Leaves reddened, fell, and grew again. Wars continued far below the hills. Men shouted in training yards. Councils argued. Spears were sharpened. Children were taught not to weep. But in the hidden grove, time moved differently. Only the full moons mattered there. Leonthe began bringing small offerings, though the swan never asked for them. Fresh figs wrapped in cloth, smooth stones from the river, little carvings of olive wood shaped during quiet hours when no one watched her hands. Once, she brought a length of soft linen, folded carefully, absurdly unsure why she had chosen it. The swan never ate the figs. It never touched the gifts.
Yet it always looked at them. And somehow, that was enough.
Slowly, Leonthe began to speak. At first, only a few words, then more. She spoke of Sparta, of her father, of the coldness in his voice and the pride he mistook for love. She spoke of victories that had left her empty. She spoke of the way men praised her strength, but never wondered whether strength had cost her anything. She spoke of nights when she stared at the sky and felt a homesickness for a place she had never known. The swan listened. That was the strange thing. It did not merely remain silent. It listened. Its stillness had weight. Its dark eyes did not wander. Sometimes it stood beside her on the shore, shoulder against her arm, its warmth bleeding gently through the night air. Sometimes it circled her slowly as she spoke, as though guarding the space around her words. And Leonthe, who had never trusted anyone with weakness, found herself trusting a creature that could not answer.
Or perhaps it answered in the only way it could. With presence. With patience. With the steady warmth of its body beside her. Over time, the grove became less a secret place and more a second life. Before each full moon, Leonthe found herself preparing without meaning to. She washed more carefully. She braided her hair, not for soldiers or suitors, but for the silent figure on the lake. She chose robes instead of armor. She walked through Sparta with her usual controlled expression, while inside her chest something waited like a hidden flame. She should have been afraid. Old stories warned of gods in animal form, stories of mortals lured into ruin by beauty, stories of divine love that ended not in happiness, but in transformation, punishment, or grief. Leonthe knew those stories, but stories belonged to other people until they began happening to you, and by then, it was usually too late. She did not call what she felt love at first. Spartans did not waste words on things that weakened resolve. But she felt it when the swan bowed its head at the sound of her voice. She felt it when her hand rested against the curve of its neck, and the warmth there steadied her more than any victory ever had. She felt it in the silence between them, a silence fuller than speech. Eventually, even without saying the word aloud, Leonthe knew. She loved the swan, and the swan loved her back, not as an animal, not as a symbol, but as something trapped behind feathers, waiting in quiet agony to be understood. Because the swan had not been born from earth. Once it had stood in a form of light. Once its hands had touched the lyre and drawn music from the world itself. Once its name had been sung in temples,
carved into marble and carried by poets at dawn. The swan was Apollo, god of light, god of music, god of prophecy, beloved, radiant, proud Apollo. But long before Leonthe had been born, Apollo had committed a crime in the eyes of Olympus. He had spoken the truth, not with rebellion, not with raised blade, not by calling armies against Zeus, but with words. He had questioned the cruelty of divine punishment. He had asked why power always demanded silence from those beneath it. He had dared to say that fear was not the same as justice. Zeus did not kill him. That would have been too simple. Instead, he unmade him. In fury, Zeus cast a curse more intimate than death. Apollo's voice was taken. His body was stripped of its divine shape. His light was folded into feathers, bone, and silence. He was forced into the form of a swan, not to teach humility, but to remind him that even the sun could be caged by shadow. The curse carried one final cruelty. If any mortal ever discovered who he truly was, the transformation would become permanent. His hidden divinity would harden. His silence would never end. So Apollo waited. Years became decades. Decades became centuries. He drifted across forgotten lakes and moonlit waters, hiding beneath stars that once seemed to belong to him. He watched mortals forget his hymns. He watched temples crack. He watched the world grow colder as the gods withdrew into pride and fear. He had almost stopped hoping. Then Leonthe came. She was not a priestess, not an oracle, not a nymph chosen by fate. She was a Spartan warrior with guarded eyes and wounded silence, a woman trained to feel nothing and endure everything. Yet she saw him, not as a marvel, not as a possession, not as an omen to exploit. She treated him as something sacred simply because he was there. Apollo could not speak. He could not tell her his name. He could not warn her. He could not confess that every full moon, when her footsteps approached through the trees, something inside his cursed body remembered how to shine. So he answered without words. A tilt of the head, a step closer,
A wing resting lightly against her arm. A stillness that held everything speech could not. And slowly, impossibly, the god of music loved her in silence. But Sparta was not a city that allowed secrets to remain untouched for long. At first, no one questioned Leonthe's absences. She had earned the kind of respect that made people cautious. If she wished to walk beneath the moon, who would tell her no? But repetition breeds suspicion. Every full moon she vanished. Every full moon she returned before dawn with softer eyes. The change in her was subtle at first. Her movements remained precise, but something in them had lost its cruelty. She still trained, still commanded, still walked like a woman carved from discipline, yet her strikes no longer carried the same bitterness. Her voice no longer cut quite as deeply. Sometimes, when she thought no one watched, she smiled to herself. In Sparta, that was enough to become dangerous. Whispers began. She wanders beyond the walls. She keeps something hidden. She speaks less in council. Her father noticed first.
Commander Adrastus had spent his life reading weakness in men before battle. He could sense hesitation in a soldier's shoulders. He could hear fear in the way someone answered a command. And in his daughter, he now sensed something he despised because he did not understand it. Tenderness. One evening, he summoned her under the pretense of strategy. Maps lay spread across a table. Oil lamps burned low. Outside, the city prepared for sleep. When the chamber emptied, Adrastus did not look at the maps. He looked at her. "What keeps you from sleep?" he asked. Leonthe said nothing. His mouth tightened. "Do not mistake silence for strength. I taught you better than that." Still she did not answer. Adrastus stepped closer. "Do not forget who you are." But that was the trouble. She had begun to remember something else. Not the person Sparta had built, the person buried underneath.
After that night, eyes followed her. Patrols lingered longer near the gates. Priests murmured about omens and moonlight. Once, a pair of soldiers followed her beyond the walls, though she lost them easily among the olive groves. Still, the attempt was enough. The city was learning to look where it had once looked away. Lethe knew the danger, not only for herself, for him. She did not yet know his name, not truly, but she knew the swan was not ordinary. She knew the grove belonged to something older than Sparta. She knew, in the way one knows truths before evidence arrives, that if the world discovered what waited for her on the lake, it would destroy them both. And still she went. Love often understands danger. It simply goes anyway. The final season began with dreams. At first, they were only fragments. A flash of golden dust on her hands, a white feather turning to stone, a lyre string snapping in the dark,
A voice calling from somewhere beneath the earth, too distant to understand.
Then one night, beneath a moon heavy and low as a dying flame, Leonthe dreamed of the grove. In the dream, the lake was still. At its edge stood a statue unlike any she had ever seen. Part man, part swan, wings half-formed behind marble shoulders. Its face was serene and sorrowful. Its eyes were open, but empty. Leonthe reached toward it, and from her own mouth came a name she did not know she knew. Apollo. The statue cracked. A voice echoed, not from the sky, but from inside her bones. Truth will freeze what love has kindled. She woke before dawn, breathless, the name still burning on her tongue. Apollo. She tried to dismiss it as a dream, but warriors know when fear is real. And this was not ordinary fear. This was prophecy. The next day she left Sparta earlier than usual. She did not wait for the full moon to rise fully above the hills. She did not take her normal path. Her feet led her deeper into the trees, through a part of the hills she had never explored, though it felt strangely familiar, as if the land itself had been guiding her toward this moment all along. There, hidden beneath ivy and moss, she found an altar. It was ancient, older than the city's laws, older perhaps than the temples that still dared to claim the gods were listening. Its stone was cracked, but the inscription remained, carved in fading gold. Apollo. Leonthe stopped breathing.
The grove around her seemed to fall silent. All at once, the pieces came together. The warmth beneath the swan's feathers, the listening eyes, the dreams, the strange pull of the full moon, the sorrow she had sometimes felt in its stillness. He was not simply enchanted. He was a god, her god. And by knowing, she had broken something. Behind her, she heard the softest movement of feathers. She turned. The swan stood between the trees watching her. Not with fear, with sadness.
As if it had known this moment would come. As if every silent meeting, every moonlit hour, every gentle touch beside the water had been leading them here. The air in the grove changed. It pulsed slowly, deeply, like the breath of something ancient waking from a long and terrible sleep. Moonlight trembled on the lake. The trees leaned inward, silent witnesses to the end of a secret that had survived centuries. Leonthe took one step toward him. Her lips parted. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say. "I did not mean to know. I am sorry. I love you." But only 2 words came out. "I know." The wind stopped. A single feather fell from the swan's back. It drifted slowly downward, touched the altar, and vanished into dust. Then the change began. The swan arched its neck, not gracefully, but in pain. Its body trembled. Feathers unraveled into threads of gold and pale light. Wings twisted, lengthened, and reshaped. The bird's form broke open, not into blood, but into radiance.
Where feathers had been, shoulders appeared. Where webbed feet touched the earth, human knees bent beneath divine weight. Leonthe staggered backward, hand over her mouth. The swan was gone. Apollo knelt before her, not as the perfect god of temple statues, not proud, not distant, not blinding. He was radiant, yes, but broken. His hair shimmered like dawn seen through tears. His skin glowed faintly like embers beneath marble. His eyes, when they lifted to hers, held centuries of silence. Leonthe fell to her knees before him. For the first time she heard his voice. It was faint, roughened by centuries of disuse. "You were not supposed to know," Apollo whispered. The words nearly broke her. "I didn't mean to." A small smile touched his mouth, not joy, forgiveness. "I know." Then the ground shuddered. No thunder came, no lightning. No voice of Zeus rolled across the heavens. That almost made it worse. The sentence had already been passed long ago.
The curse had only been waiting for truth to awaken it. Apollo's glow began to fade. Leonthe reached for him, gripping his hands. They were warm at first, trembling, real. Then the cold began. Not ordinary cold. Stone. It crept over his fingers inch by inch. His skin hardened beneath her touch. The light in his veins dimmed like molten metal cooling too quickly. "No," she whispered. Apollo looked at her as if trying to memorize her face. His fingers tightened around hers one last time.
Then they stopped moving. The stone climbed his arms, his shoulders, his throat. Leonthe shook her head, tears moving silently down her face. She had faced battle without flinching. She had seen death without closing her eyes. But this was not death. Death moved. Death took. This froze. Apollo's wings, half formed behind him, locked in place. His body remained kneeling, caught forever between transformation and farewell. His face held both love and sorrow, his eyes open, but already empty of sight.
Then the last light went out. The grove fell silent, a silence deeper than any battlefield. Leonthe remained there, holding the cold stone hand of the god she had loved before she knew his name. No god came to comfort her. No god came to apologize. No god came at all. Because Olympus had already done what Olympus did best. It had punished love for discovering the truth. Leonthe never returned to Sparta. She left her armor beside the altar. Her sword remained where it fell, half hidden in moonlit grass. The name Sparta had given her, warrior, daughter, weapon, loosened from her like smoke and drifted away. The grove became her world. Each full moon she sat beside Apollo's statue. At first she spoke to him for hours. She told him all the things she had never said while he still had warmth beneath his feathers. She told him about her childhood, her father, her fear of becoming nothing but a blade in someone else's hand. She told him she had loved him before she knew he was divine.
Then, as years passed, she spoke less. Not because love faded, because some grief becomes too deep for language. Sometimes she hummed beneath the moon, not a Spartan marching song, not a hymn, not anything she had been taught, just a soft wandering melody that seemed to come from the lake itself. Sometimes when the wind moved through the trees, the statue felt almost warm beside her. Villagers began to whisper. They said a woman haunted the hills. They said she sat beside a stone swan man beneath the full moon. Some claimed she was mad. Others said she had been chosen by a god. A few brave travelers went looking for the grove, but most returned unable to find it. Those who did find it rarely spoke loudly afterward. They said the statue was beautiful beyond explanation, not triumphant, not proud, but unbearably sad. They said if you placed your hand against Apollo's marble chest, you could feel the faintest warmth, like sunlight remembered in stone. Leonthe grew older, but she did not become weak. Her strength changed. It was no longer the sharp strength of a spear. It became the strength of roots gripping earth through storm after storm. Her hair silvered, her face lined. Her hands, once trained for weapons, became gentle from years of touching stone. Sparta changed without her. Commanders died, boys became men, wars were won and forgotten. Her father, they said, never spoke her name again, though near the end of his life he sometimes stared toward the hills when the moon was full. Leonthe remained. One final full moon, when the air was clear and the lake held the sky perfectly, she came to Apollo more slowly than before. She sat beside him as she always had. She rested her hand over his stone fingers. Then she leaned her head gently against his shoulder. For a long time she watched the moonlight on the water.
Then she closed her eyes. When villagers found her weeks later, she had not fallen. She had not struggled.
She sat peacefully beside the statue, her face calm, her lips curved in the faintest smile. Apollo's marble form, they said, shimmered softly from within. No one touched them. No temple was built. No priest claimed the place. No city took ownership of the legend. But the story spread. And now, when the moon is full and the wind is still, some say a swan returns to that hidden lake. Not to be worshipped, not to be freed, only to remember. And if a lonely soul finds the grove by accident, they may feel warmth rising from the water, hear the faintest note of a lyre beneath the leaves, and understand that some loves are not destroyed by silence. They become silence. They wait inside it, white as moonlight, still as stone, warm as a god who was loved at last, not for his light, but for the sorrow hidden beneath it. Story 3. Melanion and the Song That Could Not Be Remembered. Melanion was not born beneath a palace roof. No king claimed him, no priest blessed him, no noble family wrapped him in purple cloth or carried him before temple fires. He came into the world beneath a willow tree, during a storm that split the sky open. His mother was the daughter of a village midwife, a quiet young woman with tired eyes and gentle hands. She had been walking home when the first thunder rolled over the hills, low and deep, like the voice of something ancient turning in its sleep. Rain fell so suddenly that the dirt road became a ribbon of mud beneath her feet. Birds scattered from the trees. The wind bent the tall grass flat against the earth. By the time she reached the old willow near the river, she could go no farther. There, beneath branches heavy with rain, Melanion was born. The storm raged around him. Lightning flashed white across the clouds. The river swirled and rushed over stones. But the child did not cry. Instead, as his mother held him against her chest, he made a sound so soft that she first mistook it for the wind moving through wet leaves. He was humming. Not loudly, not clearly, but with a strange, steady sweetness, as if some forgotten melody had entered the world with him and was searching for a voice. From that night onward, music seemed to follow him. When Melanion learned to walk, the grass around his small feet often trembled in rhythm. When he knelt by streams to drink, water whispered patterns that sounded almost like song. Birds answered him before he knew how to call them. Leaves stirred when he passed, even on windless afternoons. No one taught him music. He simply remembered it. By the age of 10, he could mimic any bird in the valley and then weave its call into a melody that made shepherds stop on the hillsides. By 12, he could tap rhythms on clay pots that made children dance without meaning to. By 16, he played the lyre with such tenderness that even men hardened by war looked away to hide the tears gathering in their eyes. His voice was not powerful in the way singers in royal halls tried to be powerful. It did not force itself into the air. It entered quietly. It found the hidden places inside people and opened them. He sang of rivers that outlived kingdoms, of brothers lost to war, of fields before armies crossed them, of mothers waiting at doorways, of travelers who could not return home because home had changed while they were gone. People called him a miracle, a child of divine breath, a gift sent to a suffering world. Melanion never claimed such things.
He accepted food when it was offered, slept in barns when families had no spare room, and played for anyone who asked. He performed for kings and beggars with the same calm attention. He did not charge the poor. He did not flatter the powerful. His music belonged to whoever needed it most, and for a time, that was enough. He traveled from village to village with his lyre wrapped in cloth across his back. In one town, he played beside the bed of a fevered boy until the child's breathing softened and his mother finally slept. In another, he sang during the funeral of a farmer no one thought important, and half the village wept as if they had lost a king. Once he performed before two families who had hated each other for years, and by the end of the evening, old men who had sworn never to speak again sat together in silence, sharing wine. His songs did not erase sorrow. They gave sorrow shape. And because people could finally see what hurt them, they could begin to carry it. But not all who listened were mortal. One spring evening, when the river was swollen with melted snow and the air smelled of wet earth, Melanion sat alone by the water. He was not performing for anyone. No villagers surrounded him, no children sat at his feet, no coins waited in a bowl.
He was playing for the stars before they appeared. The melody was simple at first, only a few notes repeated slowly, like light touching the surface of a stream. Then it deepened. The river quieted. Frogs stopped calling from the reeds. The evening wind slowed until the leaves above him hung still. Melanion's fingers paused. The world was listening. Then they came. 9 figures stepped from behind the veil of ordinary sight, emerging from the dusk as if they had always been there, and the world had only just remembered to reveal them. The Muses. They did not arrive like queens, though each carried a majesty older than kingdoms. They did not blaze like Olympians hungry for worship. They came robed in light, shadow, memory, rhythm, and breath. One held the weight of history in her eyes. Another moved as though dance were the true language of the body. Another carried the gravity of tragedy. Another the brightness of comedy. Another the vastness of epic song.
Melanion knew them without being told. Every musician knew them. Every poet, every dancer, every storyteller who had ever waited in terror for inspiration to come knew the shape of their presence, even if only in dreams. He lowered his head. For the first time in his life, he felt afraid to play. But the eldest muse, Calliope, stepped forward. Her gaze was stern, yet not unkind. "Continue," she said. So Melanion played. At first his hands trembled, then the music found him again. The song rose from the riverbank into the deepening sky, fragile and luminous. When the final note faded, Melanion expected silence. Instead, the Muses sang back. 9 voices joined together, not loudly, not for display. They sang as though creation itself had taken breath. Their harmony was older than language. It held birth, mourning, laughter, hunger, memory, and the ache of beauty that mortals feel but cannot name. Melanion closed his eyes. Without thinking, he joined them. His voice did not imitate theirs. It changed them. The harmony widened. For one impossible moment, mortal and divine music touched without one devouring the other. When the last note fell away, the stars seemed closer. Calliope crossed the grass and placed 2 fingers against Melanion's brow.
"You are not ordinary," she said. "You are a vessel."
And from that night on, Melanian's life no longer belonged only to himself. The Muses brought him to the quiet folds of Mount Helicon, where the world felt thinner and every sound carried meaning. There, beneath ancient trees and skies unclouded by human ambition, they taught him. Not as mortals teach. There were no scrolls, no lectures, no stern masters striking his hands for mistakes. Cleo whispered histories into his dreams, and he woke knowing the grief of cities that had vanished before his great-grandparents were born.
Terpsichore danced barefoot through leaves while he played, and his fingers learned how rhythm lived in muscle, breath, and turning. Euterpe placed a flute across his palms and told him only to listen, and in that listening he heard how silence shaped sound. Melpomene taught him that tragedy was not merely sadness, but the terrible dignity of loving what cannot last. Each muse gave him something. Not power exactly, perspective. He learned to hear the music between words, the pause before someone admits fear, the breath after a name is spoken, the hollow space inside applause, the trembling joy of a child seeing snow for the first time, the low rhythm of grief in a house where someone has died. The Muses did not ask him to worship them. They asked him to remember why he had been given his gift. Sing for mortals, they told him, for the weary, for the proud, for the broken, for those who have forgotten that beauty still exists, even when suffering does not end.
At first, Melanian obeyed, and the world loved him for it. He performed in city squares, vineyards, royal courts, roadside inns, open fields, and quiet rooms where only one dying person lay awake to hear him. His songs carried across Greece like a second spring. They mended fathers to sons. They softened enemies into uneasy peace. They stirred young rebels to lift their heads. They gave widows permission to weep. Where he played, people remembered themselves. But as his gift grew, something else grew with it. Ambition. It did not arrive suddenly. It did not enter him like a demon in a story. It began as a question, small and almost harmless. What else is possible? He had learned songs that could comfort grief, songs that could awaken courage, songs that could make memory feel alive. But what lay beyond that? What music had even the gods never heard? At night, after applause faded and fires burned low, Melanian began to write alone. At first he told himself he was only practicing,
Only exploring. Only following inspiration wherever it led.
but the fragments that came to him were unlike anything he had known. A phrase that seemed to slow the wind, a chord that made candle flames lean toward him, a rhythm that caused his own heartbeat to change. He began to dream of a song with no beginning and no end, a song that could gather all sorrow and all beauty into one breath, a song that could make stones weep, a final song. He told no one, not the villagers who loved him, not the kings who praised him, not even the Muses, especially not the Muses. Some part of him no longer wanted to receive the divine and pass it onward. He wanted to create something the divine itself would have to bow before. The Muses noticed. They did not see it first in his music, because his music remained beautiful. They saw it in his eyes,
The way he looked past the people listening to him. The way he grew impatient with ordinary sorrow. The way he began to treat applause not as gratitude, but as proof that the world had not yet understood the height he was meant to reach. Melanion withdrew from public life. He stopped accepting invitations. He stopped teaching children. He stopped answering letters from nobles and old friends. Some said he had fallen ill. Others said the gods had taken him. A few, with the cruel confidence of rumor, claimed he had lost his gift. None of them knew the truth. Melanion had gone deeper into Mount Helicon than any mortal should have gone. There, in a cave lined with crystals that trembled when moonlight touched them, he began composing the final song. It did not come easily. It came like a thing half buried in reality. Sometimes he heard it in thunder, sometimes in the silence after waking, sometimes in the sound of his own blood moving through his ears. He wrote fragments on scraps of parchment, then destroyed them because ink made them feel too small.
He played phrases on his lyre, then wept because the strings could not hold what his mind had touched. Days passed, then weeks, then perhaps months. Time behaved strangely in that cave. Morning and night no longer meant what they meant outside. He slept only when exhaustion crushed him. He ate when he remembered he had a body. His hair grew long. His hands became thin. His eyes shone with feverish purpose. And still the song grew. It was not happy. It was not sad. It was not a song about love, death, gods, war, home, or longing. It contained all of them. Its opening note held the birth of stars. Its falling phrase carried the ruin of empires. One passage sounded like a mother laughing before she knows she will grieve. Another like waves erasing names written in sand. Another like a child reaching for light. Melanion did not feel as though he were composing it. He felt as though he were discovering a secret the world had hidden inside itself since the beginning.
At last, the final note came. When he played the completed song for the first time, the world changed. Birds stopped in mid-flight and settled silently on branches. Streams quieted as if afraid to interrupt. Trees leaned toward the mountain, though no wind blew. Far above, in the marble chambers of Olympus, the gods turned their heads. Even the fates paused. Clotho's thread trembled between her fingers. Lachesis looked up from the measure of a life not yet finished. Atropos, whose shears never hesitated, lowered her hand and listened. The song did not demand worship. It did not plead to be admired. It simply revealed. For the length of its playing, nothing could hide from itself. When the final note faded, even the cave refused to echo it. Melanion sat shaking in the silence. He knew what he had made. The muses knew too. They waited for him to emerge from the cave and share it with the world. He did emerge, but he did not share it.
When people heard that Melanion had returned, they came from everywhere. Musicians, poets, priests, former students, old friends, strangers who had carried his songs in their hearts for years. They gathered beneath the slopes of Helicon and begged to hear what he had created. Melanion looked at them and smiled faintly. "Not yet," he said.
At first, they accepted this. Great art, they told themselves, required the right hour. But days passed, then weeks. He performed other songs. They were still beautiful. Audiences still wept. Kings still praised him. But those who had heard whispers of what happened on the mountain knew something was being withheld. The muses came to him at dusk. They appeared not in anger, but in sorrow. Their robes glowed softly with the colors of inspiration, but their faces were grave. "You were chosen to carry beauty," said Erato. "Beauty is not meant to be buried," said Cleo. "You must sing it," whispered Calliope. Melanion lowered his gaze. "I will not see it cheapened." The words struck the muses like a physical blow. Terpsichore stepped back. "Cheapened?" Melanion's voice remained calm. "Mortals will applaud without understanding. Kings will claim it. Priests will twist it into ritual. Lesser musicians will tear it apart and imitate what they cannot comprehend. No, this song is too pure for them." The silence that followed was colder than winter. Calliope looked at him for a long time. "You think mortals are unworthy of beauty?" Melanion did not answer. He did not need to. The answer was already in his face. "You think you alone are its guardian," Cleo said. "I alone understand what it is," Melanion replied. There it was. Not rage, not madness. Possession. The eldest muse's expression hardened, but her eyes remained sad. "Then you are no longer ours," Calliope said. "Not because you created something beyond our teaching, but because you have chained it to your pride." Melanion said nothing. The muses vanished, and the world waited. The gods waited. The poets waited. The winds around Helicon waited. Nothing came. Melanion kept the final song locked inside himself. He did not write it down. He did not teach it. He did not perform even a fragment. He called it sacred. But sacred things, when sealed too long inside pride, begin to rot. The curse came without thunder. That was perhaps the cruelest part. No lightning struck his roof. No god appeared at his doorway. No monster rose from the earth to punish him. There was only a night like any other, with the stars pale above the hills and the air still enough for sleep. Melanion lay down beneath an open window, the final song safe inside him. Or so he believed. Sleep came gently, and in the dream the song returned, not as memory, as presence. It surrounded him, clearer than ever before, richer, deeper, more perfect than the version he had created in the cave. He heard harmonies he had not written, passages he had not dared imagine. The melody lifted him through stars, carried him beneath oceans, unspooled the hidden pattern of grief and joy, until he wept in awe. In the dream, he knew it completely. Every note, every breath, every impossible turn. He sang with it. He belonged to it. Then morning came, and the song was gone. Not blurred, not weakened. Gone. Melanion sat upright, heart hammering. He grabbed his lyre and tried to play the opening note. Nothing. He searched his mind for the first phrase. Nothing. He remembered that he had heard it. He remembered that it had been perfect. He remembered the feeling of standing inside its beauty, but he could not remember the sound. Panic seized him. He spent the day trying to recover it. He paced, he hummed, he struck chords until his fingers bled. He wrote symbols, fragments, desperate guesses. None were right. That night, terrified and hopeful, he slept again. The song returned, whole, radiant, mercilessly beautiful. In the dream, Melanian laughed with relief.
Of course. Of course it was still his. Of course morning had only confused him. He clung to the melody. He repeated it inside the dream. He swore he would carry it back. Then dawn touched the world, and again the song vanished. This became his punishment. Every night he heard the final song in its complete perfection. Every morning he forgot it. He tried everything. He kept candles burning beside his bed. He tied charcoal to his fingers, hoping his sleeping hand might write. He hired scribes to sit near him through the night and record any sound he made. He begged seers to enter his dreams. He asked priests to pray. He drank bitter herbs that promised memory. He slept beside mirrors. He tied strings around his wrists. He commanded students to wake him before dawn. Nothing worked. The curse was precise. Inside the dream, the song belonged to him. In waking life, it passed through him like water through broken hands. The muses watched from a distance.
He was given a gift, said Euterpe.
And chose to cage it, said Polyhymnia.
Now he alone will hear it, whispered Clio. And never remember, said Calliope. It was not vengeance. It was balance. Melanian withdrew completely from the world. At first, people pitied him. Then they grew confused, then afraid. He stopped performing. He refused visitors. His house became dusty and cold. Meals were left untouched outside his door. His lyre lay across his lap for hours while he stared at nothing, chasing a sound that existed only beyond waking. His body thinned. His fingers trembled. His once golden voice became rough from nights of desperate humming. He broke strings and did not repair them. He scratched fragments onto walls, floors, tables, even his own skin, only to wake later and find meaningless marks. Waking became punishment. Sleep became worship. And the song became both heaven and torment. Eventually, he left his home. No one knew why.
Perhaps he believed the melody was hiding somewhere in the world. Perhaps he thought another singer might have dreamed it too. Perhaps he could no longer bear rooms, roofs, and the ordinary cruelty of morning light. He wandered barefoot from village to village, no longer the beloved bard, but a gaunt figure wrapped in torn cloth, eyes bright with sleepless hunger. "Have you heard it?" he asked strangers. "The song with no beginning, the song with no end. Have you heard it in your sleep?" At first people answered kindly, then carefully. Then they avoided him. Some threw stones when he followed them too long. Others crossed themselves and shut their doors. Children who once might have sat at his feet now hid behind their mothers. He sang fragments in the streets, sudden frantic bursts of melody that made no sense to anyone else. To him, they were clues, shards of a mirror he could almost rebuild. He would laugh when he thought he had found a piece, then sob when it slipped away.
Each night, wherever he slept, the song returned. Under trees, in abandoned shrines, beside roads, near the doorways of inns whose keepers once begged him to perform, the final song came faithfully, and each dawn betrayed him. Years passed, or perhaps only seasons. Those who saw him could not agree. Suffering changes the way time clings to a person. Melanion became thin as twilight. His skin grew pale. His hair tangled around his face. His hands, once graceful enough to make gods pause, curled around empty air as if holding an invisible lyre. He no longer asked for food, only sleep. One evening, after wandering farther than memory could map, he came to a cliff overlooking the sea. There were no towns nearby, no roads, no audience, no one to ask whether they had heard what he had lost. Only wind, waves, and stars rising slowly into the darkening blue. Melanion sat against a stone and looked out over the water. For once he did not weep. He did not curse. He did not try to hump.
He simply closed his eyes. And the dream came. But this time, something was different. There was no mist, no struggle, no distant melody to chase. The final song was there from the beginning, full and clear. And it was not merely sound anymore. It was a place, a world built from music. Melanion stood barefoot upon cords that bent beneath him like grass. Stars pulsed overhead in rhythm. The sky itself was a symphony. The wind sang in harmony. The sea moved not below him, but through him, vast and shining. He heard every note he had lost, every phrase, every impossible turn. His own voice joined the song, and it did not tremble, it did not break, it did not forget. For the first time, Melanion understood. The song had never truly belonged to him, not when he discovered it, not when he hid it, not when he chased it through madness. He had been not its master, but its witness, a vessel. That was what Calliope had told him on the first night beneath the stars.
A vessel is not meant to keep what fills it forever. It is meant to pour.
In that final dream there was no shame, no punishment, no desperate need to remember, only surrender and release. When morning came, Melanion did not wake. A shepherd found him later beneath the cliffside olive trees, his body curled against the stone, hands resting on his chest as if cradling an invisible lyre. His face was peaceful. The years of hunger and torment seemed to have fallen away from him. There was no scroll beside him, no final notation, no written proof that the song had ever existed. But above the cliff, seabirds circled in strange patterns, turning and dipping as if following a rhythm only they could hear. The sea below moved gently against the rocks, and for a moment those who stood nearby swore that the waves did not sound like waves at all. They sounded like something older, something almost remembered. Melanion was buried beneath a lone olive tree near the place where he had last slept.
No priest performed the rites. No crowd gathered. Only the shepherd who found him, and a few villagers who still remembered stories of the bard whose music
at once made even the gods pause. There was no monument, only earth, only wind, only silence. But silence has a way of carrying what noise cannot. In the years that followed, strange things were whispered across the land. Travelers claimed that if you passed the cliff under a new moon, you might hear a melody in the wind. Not a full song, never that, only a fragment, brief and heartbreakingly beautiful, just enough to make you stop walking and forget for a moment why you were in a hurry. Children began dreaming of music they had never heard. Musicians woke at night with tears on their faces and no memory of why. Sometimes a lonely bard sitting at dusk would touch a lyre and find a chord beneath their fingers that did not feel like their own. Something perfect, something impossible. But by morning, it would be gone.
The Muses did not reclaim the song. They did not curse another mortal for reaching too high. Perhaps they understood what Melanian had become. Not a hero, not a warning, not even a failure. A soul who had mistaken beauty for possession and found peace only when he released the need to own what was never meant to be held. The final song was never written down. It was never performed in amphitheaters, never sung in temples, never taught from master to student. It does not live in scroll, stone, or memory. It lives in the quiet spaces between sleep and waking, in the hush before a musician plays the first note, in the ache that rises when the sea sounds different after grief,
in the silence after beauty passes and leaves you changed, though you cannot explain how. Some say if you stand alone on the right cliff on the right night, with no one watching and the wind kind enough to listen, you may hear it. Only a breath, only a fragment, and maybe for one impossible instant you will understand why Melanian could never let it go, and why, in the end, he had to. And so the stories fade, one by one, like embers settling beneath ash. The forge grows quiet. The moonlit lake becomes still. The final song slips back into the place between sleep and waking. The mirror darkens. The garden folds itself beneath the stars. The old roads, wells, orchards, tides, and shadowed houses return to silence. But silence in the world of myth is never truly empty. It is where the forgotten things wait. A name not spoken for centuries. A promise left unfinished. A prayer never sent. A song no waking mind can hold. A flame that refuses to die even when the gods themselves turn away. Perhaps that is why these old stories still find us. Not because we believe every monster, every curse, every divine punishment exactly as it was told. Not because we expect to meet gods in forests, swans beneath the moon, or lost cities under the sea. But because somewhere inside each myth there is something human enough to recognize. A fear of being forgotten.
A longing to be seen. a gift that becomes dangerous when kept too tightly. A truth that waits patiently beneath beautiful lies. A love that changes shape but does not disappear. A light carried through darkness at great cost. The ancients gave these feelings names. They gave them wings, crowns, flames, shadows, rivers, stars, and voices. They placed them on mountains and beneath oceans. They hid them in gardens, mirrors, songs, and sleeping houses. And then they passed them down, not as answers, as lanterns, small lights held out against the dark. So now, as the night deepens and the world outside grows quieter, let the stories loosen their hold. Let the names drift softly away. Let the gods return to their distant halls, the heroes to their roads, the lost souls to their rest. You do not need to remember every detail, only the feeling, the warmth of a fire return into a cold room, the silver stillness of moonlight on water, the ache of a melody almost remembered, the hush before dawn begins again. And maybe, somewhere beyond the edge of waking, you will hear it too. A hammer striking an anvil, a swan moving across a silent lake, a lyre playing one impossible note, a well whispering beneath stone, a sea breathing against the shore, not loudly, never loudly, only enough to remind you that every story, even the saddest one, leaves behind a little light. So rest now. Let the myths keep watch. Let the old flames burn low. And if dreams come, may they be gentle. May they carry you through forgotten valleys, beneath patient stars, past sleeping shadows and quiet gods, until morning finds you softly, slowly, and with enough light to begin again.